Language is a detriment, an earthbound limitation from which the poet suffers more than anyone else. At times, he can actually hate it, denounce it, and execrate it, or rather hate himself for being born to work with this miserable instrument. The poet thinks with envy of the painter whose language, color, is instantly comprehensible to everyone from the North Pole to Africa, or of the musician, whose notes also speak in every human tongue, and who commands so many new, individual, subtly differentiated languages, from simple melody to the 100 voices of the orchestra, from horn to clarinet, violin to harp. For one reason, however, the poet envies the musician constantly, and especially profoundly. The musician's language belongs to him alone. It is just for making music, nothing more. The poet, on the other hand, must use, for his work, the same language employed in school and business, dispatching telegrams and conducting lawsuits. How handicapped the poet is in having no individual instrument for his art, no dwelling of his own, no private garden, no attic window through which to look at the moon. Each and everything must partake of the commonplace to him. If the poet says heart, meaning thereby the most vibrant of men's qualities, his innermost abilities and weaknesses, the word at the same time signifies a muscle. Now, if the poet says power, he must contend for the meaning of the word with the engineer and the electrician. If he speaks of blessedness, a flavor of theology subtly creeps into the expression of his idea. There is not a single word the poet can use that does not squint in another direction from the one he intends, and does not in the same breath recall alien, disturbing, and contradictory notions, that does not bear itself restrictions and abridgments. It breaks apart like a voice, striking two narrow walls, and rebounds, incomplete, muffled. And so, if a scoundrel is to be defined as someone who gives more than he has, a poet can never be a scoundrel. Indeed, he does not give so much as a tenth, not so much as 100th part of what he would like to give. In fact, the poet is satisfied if he is quite superficially, distantly, and, as it were, accidentally understood by his listener, or at least is not grossly misunderstood on his most important points. He seldom achieves more than this. And wherever the poet is praised or blamed, wherever he is effective or laughed to scorn, wherever he is loved or despised, it is never his real thoughts and dreams that are in question, but only that 100th part of them that can force its way through the narrow channel of speech and into the equally narrow channel of his reader's understanding. That is why people defend themselves with so much fear, as though from a deadly threat, when an artist or an entire generation of young artists begins to experiment with new expressions and new language, and to tug at the bonds that constrain them. For a citizen who has learned it, language, any language that he has painfully acquired, not just that of words, for him language is holy. To the average man, everything is sacrosanct that is held in common by society, that he shares with many, if possible with all, that never reminds him of loneliness, of birth and death, of the innermost I. The poet's fellow citizens, like himself, have the ideal of a world language, but the world language of the citizen is not the same one the poet dreams of, a primeval forest of riches, an immense orchestra. Rather, the citizen's is a simplified telegraphic sign language, the use of which will save people trouble, words, and paper, and will not interfere with the earning of money. Alas, writing poetry, composing music, and endeavors of that sort always, as it happens, interfere with the earning of money. Now, if our fellow citizen has learned a language that he takes to be the language of art, he is content in the belief that he understands art and has mastered it. He then becomes furious if he discovers that this language he acquired so painfully is valid only for a quite small province of the world of art. In our grandfather's time, there were energetic and educated people who had pushed their way ahead in musical appreciation to the point of admitting to understanding of the language. beside Mozart and Haydn, Beethoven too. To that extent they went along. But then with Chopin and Liszt and Wagner, when they were required again and again to learn a new language, to become once more revolutionary and young, flexible and happy in their recognition of something really new, then they grew deeply offended. They proclaimed the downfall of art and the degeneracy of the times in which they were condemned to live. What happened to those people is now happening to many thousands more. Art is producing new faces, new languages, babbling sounds, and unfamiliar gestures. It is tired of always talking the same language of yesterday and the day before that. It wants to dance for a change. It wants to kick over the traces. It wants to cock its hat and walk zigzag. And our fellow citizens are furious at this. They feel that they are being mocked and that their values are being attacked at the very root. They hurl curses about in every direction and pull the blanket of their education up over their ears. And the same citizen who rushes off to the law courts at the very slightest slur or affront to his personal dignity now becomes prolific in horrid insults. The kind of range and fruitless excitement does not, however, free the citizen, does not unburden and cleanse his soul, does not by any means put an end to his inner unrest and disgust. The artist, on the other hand, who has no less to complain about in the case of this fellow citizen than vice versa, takes the trouble to seek to discover and learn a new language for his anger, his contempt, and his bitterness. He feels that insults will not help, and he sees that he who utters them is in the wrong. Since in our time he has no utter ideal but himself, and since the artist wills and desires nothing except to be wholly himself, and to do and speak his nature, he converts his enmity towards his fellow citizens into the most personal possible form, the most beautiful, the most eloquent. He does not translate his scorn into venom, but rather sifts and kneads it into a new irony, a new caricature, a new insight that transforms what is unpleasant and irritating into what is agreeable and beautiful. What an infinite number of languages nature has, and what an infinite number men have invented. The few thousand simple grammars that nations have hammered out from Sanskrit to Volapük are relatively meager accomplishments. They are meager because they have always contented themselves with what was essential, and our fellow citizens have always agreed among themselves that what is most essential is earning money, baking bread, and the like. On such fare language cannot thrive. Never has a human language, I mean a grammatical one, achieved half the animation, wit, elegance, and spirit that a cat reveals in the simple waving of her tail, or a bird of paradise in the silvery plumage of the wedding attire. And yet man, as soon as he became himself and did not try to imitate the ants or the bees, greatly outdid the bird of paradise, the cat, and all other animals and plants. He thought up languages that permit him to communicate and empathize infinitely better than German, Greek, and Italians do. He conjured up religions, architectures, paintings, philosophies. He created music whose meaningfulness and richness of color far excel any bird of paradise or butterfly. If I think Italian painting, what untold riches there are in the words, choirs singing with reverence and sweetness, instruments of all kinds blissfully singing, a scent of pious coolness in marble churches, monks fervently praying, and beautiful women reigning imperiously in southern lands. Or what if I think Chopin? Notes descend softly, sadly, out of the night. The lonely plaint of homesickness in a foreign land rises to the accompaniment of strings. The most subtle, most personal sufferings are sounded in harmonies and dissonances more profound and infinitely more accurate and delicate than any description of a sufferer in scientific terms, figures, and formulas. Who seriously believes that Werther and Wilhelm Meister are written in the same language, that Jean-Paul spoke the same language as our schoolteachers? And those are only poets. They had to work with the poverty and brittleness of language. They had to work with an instrument made for something entirely different. Utter the word Egypt, and you hear a speech that praises God in mighty brazen chords, full of intuitions of eternity and deep dread of mortality. A king's gaze inexorably out of stony eyes across millions of slaves, and yet beyond all, Everything they look simply into the dark eyes of death. Sacred animals stare out into earthy solemnity. Lotus flowers, delicate in the hands of dancing girls, perfume the air. A world, a starry heaven full of worlds, is contained in a simple word, Egypt. You can do nothing but fantasize about it for a month if you wished. But suddenly something else occurs to you. You hear the name Renoir, and you smile and see the whole world resolved into circular brushstrokes, rosy, bright, and happy. And you say Schopenhauer and see this same world represented by lines of suffering men, who during sleepless nights have turned suffering into a god, and who, with solemn faces, move down a long, rough street leading to an infinitely quiet, infinitely modest, sad paradise. Or the words Welt and Welt. The whole world arranges itself into a misty, flexible, Jean-Paul fashion around a middle-class German home, where the soul of humanity divided between two brothers moves unruffled through the nightmare of a crotchety will and the intrigues of a mad ant-heap of teeming Philistines. The average citizen would like to compare the creative to the madman. The average citizen is right in feeling he would immediately go mad if, like the artist, the man of religion, the philosopher, he allowed himself to become acquainted with the abyss within. He may call the abyss the soul of the unconscious or whatever he wishes. Out of it comes the impulse of our lives. The average citizen has set a watchman between himself and the soul, a consciousness, a morality, a security police. The average citizen recognizes nothing that comes directly from that abyss of the soul before it has been given the watchman's stamp of approval. The artist's constant distrust, however, is not directed against the region of the soul, but precisely against that border watchman's authority. The artist secretly comes and goes between this side and that, between the conscious and the unconscious, as though at home in both. While he tarries on this side, on the familiar daylight side where the citizen lives, the poverty of all languages presses heavily upon him, and to be a poet seems a thorny life. But once he is over there in the land of the soul, then magically word after word floats through him from every wind. Stars sing out, mountains smile. The world is perfect, and it is the language of God in which no word and no letter is lacking, where everything can be said, where everything chimes, where everything is resolved.
Like, subscribe, notification bell, join the herd.